Emily Carter had spent 5 years watching other people's lives change from behind a reception desk. She greeted lawyers in expensive suits, clients with complicated problems, and witnesses with trembling hands. She smiled, she answered phones, she filed papers. Her own life remained stubbornly the same. A cramped apartment, mounting debt, and dreams that felt more like fantasies with each passing year. Then one Tuesday morning, a man she'd never heard of died and left her $2.3 million. Emily thought that was the shocking part. She had no idea the real surprise was still coming.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The fluorescent lights of Morrison & Associates hummed their usual monotonous tune as Emily settled into her chair at 7:45, exactly 15 minutes before the official start of her workday. She had learned early that arriving early meant 15 minutes of peace before the phone started ringing, before the parade of stressed clients and demanding attorneys began. Those 15 minutes were hers alone, and she guarded them carefully. Emily was halfway through her coffee when Mr. Harrison Beck emerged from his office. Harrison was a senior partner, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on his nose. In 5 years, he'd spoken directly to Emily perhaps a dozen times, always brief exchanges about scheduling or lost files. So when he approached her desk with an unusually serious expression, Emily's first thought was that she'd made some terrible mistake. "Emily, could you come to my office, please? This won't take long." Her stomach dropped. She ran through the past week in her mind, searching for errors. Had she misdirected an important call? Filed something incorrectly? She followed Harrison down the hallway, acutely aware of her secondhand blouse and the shoes she'd resold twice because buying new ones wasn't in her budget. Harrison's office was exactly what you'd expect from a man who'd spent 30 years in law. Dark wood, leather chairs, shelves lined with legal volumes that probably cost more than Emily's car. He gestured for her to sit, then settled behind his desk with a manila folder. "Emily, how long have you worked here?" 5 years this October, Mr. Beck." "And in that time, would you say you've had much interaction with our clients?" Emily's confusion deepened. "I greet everyone who comes in, answer their questions if I can. Standard reception duties." Harrison nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. "Do you remember a client named Walter Hastings?" Emily searched her memory. The name sparked nothing. 5 years of faces blurred together after a while. "I'm not sure. Should I?" "Mr. Hastings passed away last week. He was 82 years old." Harrison opened the folder, studying its contents. He had no living relatives, no children, no siblings, no extended family to speak of. He was, by all accounts, a very private man who lived a quiet life. "I'm sorry to hear that," Emily said, still utterly confused about why she was sitting in this office. Harrison looked up, and something in his expression made Emily's heart start to pound. "Mr. Hastings left a will, a very specific, very clear will that was updated 3 months ago." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Emily, he left his entire estate to you." The words hung in the air. Emily waited for the punchline, for Harrison to smile and explain the real reason she was here. When he didn't, she laughed nervously. "That's impossible. I don't know anyone named Walter Hastings." "Nevertheless, you are named as the sole beneficiary of his estate, which includes his savings, his home, and various investments. The total value is approximately $2.3 million. Emily's laugh died. The room tilted slightly. "This is a mistake. It has to be a mistake." "I assure you it's not. I handled Mr. Hastings' legal affairs for nearly 20 years. He was extremely meticulous. When he updated his will 3 months ago, he made it very clear that you were to inherit everything." "But why? I don't understand. Are you sure it's me? Maybe there's another Emily Carter." Harrison slid a document across the desk.
Emily saw her full name, Emily Rose Carter, along with her date of birth and current address. Her hands trembled as she picked up the paper. "There must be some condition," she said, her mind racing. "Some catch. People don't just leave millions of dollars to strangers." "There are no conditions, no requirements. The inheritance is yours, free and clear, provided you accept it." "What if I don't?" "Then, according to Mr. Hastings' instructions, the money would be divided among several charities he specified. But Emily, before you make any decisions, there's something else." Harrison pulled an envelope from the folder. "Mr. Hastings left you a letter. He asked that I give it to you personally." Emily took the envelope with numb fingers. Her name was written on the front in shaky handwriting. She stared at it, afraid to open it, afraid of what truth it might contain. "Take the rest of the day," Harrison said gently. "Read the letter, think about things. We can discuss the details whenever you're ready." Emily nodded mutely and stood, clutching the envelope. She walked back to her desk in a daze, gathered her purse and left the building without speaking to anyone. Outside, the Boston morning was bright and cold, the October sun doing little to warm the air. She walked 3 blocks to a small park and sat on a bench, the envelope burning in her hands. Finally, she opened it. The letter was written in the same shaky handwriting, dated 2 months before Walter Hastings' death. "Dear Emily, you don't know me, but I know you. Before you think this is creepy or sinister, please understand that what I'm about to tell you is something I should have said 3 years ago, but I was a coward. 3 years ago, on a Tuesday morning in March, I came to Morrison & Associates to arrange my affairs. I had just received a diagnosis that my doctors assured me left no room for hope. I had no living relatives, no children, no siblings, no extended family to speak of. I was, by all accounts, a very private man who lived a quiet life. I was ready to die. I had been ready for a long time. You were working the reception desk that morning. I was early for my appointment, and you asked me if I'd like some coffee while I waited. Such a small thing, but you asked with a smile that reached your eyes. You asked if I was doing okay. Most people looked through me. An old man was just part of the furniture. But you saw me. We talked for maybe 10 minutes before Mr. Beck was ready. You told me about a movie you'd seen, about how you'd burned your breakfast that morning and set off your smoke alarm. Mundane things. Human things. You treated me like a person, not a problem or a burden. I walked into that appointment and I changed my will. Not to include you, not yet, but to cancel my other plans. I decided to live a little longer. Over the past 3 years, I've watched you from a distance. Not in a stalking way, please don't think that, but I came back to Morrison & Associates several times for minor legal matters, and I saw how you treated everyone with that same kindness. The stressed mother with the crying child, the young man who couldn't afford the consultation fee, the elderly woman who needed someone to explain things 3 times. You gave them all your attention, your kindness, your humanity. And you did it while struggling yourself. I overheard enough to know that you were barely making ends meet, that you had your own problems. But you never let it make you bitter or cruel. Emily, I decided to leave you my estate because I believe people like you are rare. The world takes and takes from kind people until there's nothing left. I want to give back to you what you gave to me, a reason to keep going, a chance to build something, freedom to choose your own path. I don't want anything from you, no monuments, no memorials. Just take this gift and do something good with your life. Be happy. That's all an old man could want. Thank you for saving my life with a cup of coffee and a smile. Walter Hastings. Emily read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. She tried to remember that Tuesday morning 3 years ago. She'd made coffee for countless people, smiled at thousands of faces. The memory wasn't there. It was just another morning in a blur of identical mornings. But to Walter Hastings, it had been everything. She folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. Her hands were still shaking, but now for a different reason. A man she couldn't even remember had seen something in her that she had stopped seeing in herself. He had turned a moment of ordinary kindness into a lifeline, both for himself and now for her. Emily stood up from the bench and walked back towards the law office. She had a lot of questions for Harrison Beck, and for the first time in 5 years, she had reason to believe her life was about to change. She had no idea how much it already had.
Emily spent the next week in a strange limbo between her old life and an unimaginable new one. She went to work each day, answered phones, filed papers, and smiled at clients, all while knowing that in a few weeks, she wouldn't need this job anymore. The knowledge felt surreal, like she was watching her own life from outside her body. Harrison Beck handled everything with professional efficiency. There were forms to sign, accounts to transfer, loose ends to tie up. Walter Hastings had been organized to an almost obsessive degree, and his estate was clean and clear. No debts, no complications, no angry relatives emerging from the woodwork to contest the will. "You're very lucky," Harrison told her during one of their meetings. "Estate transfers are usually nightmares, but Walter made sure everything was bulletproof. He knew exactly what he was doing." Emily nodded, staring at another stack of papers. "Can I ask you something? What was he like?" Harrison leaned back in his chair, a slight smile touching his lips. "Walter was one of the most intelligent men I've ever met. He worked as an engineer for 40 years, held several patents, made good investments, lived frugally. He was also intensely private. After his wife died in the late 90s, he basically withdrew from the world." "He was married?" "For 30 years. Cancer took her. They never had children. Couldn't, from what I understand. Her death broke something in him. He became a ghost of himself." Emily felt a pang of sadness for the man she'd never known. "So he was alone for over 20 years?" "By choice, mostly. I tried to get him to join social groups, suggested he volunteer, but he wasn't interested. Until 3 years ago, anyway. After that appointment you were talking about in his letter, he seemed different. He started taking art classes, believe it or not. Told me he was learning to paint. Said he wanted to capture beauty while he still could." "Did he know he was dying?" "The diagnosis he mentioned in his letter, the doctors were wrong. Whatever they thought they saw, it either resolved on its own or was misread. Walter lived 3 more years in relatively good health. He died of a heart attack in his sleep. Quick, painless. The kind of death most people hope for." Emily absorbed this information. Walter had been given a death sentence, decided to end his own life, changed his mind because of a conversation he had with her, and then lived 3 more years. 3 years he wouldn't have had. The weight of that realization was crushing and uplifting at the same time. "There's something else," Harrison said, pulling her from her thoughts. He retrieved a small key from his desk drawer. "Walter's house. It's yours now, of course, but before you decide what to do with it, I think you should visit. Walter left us specific instructions that nothing was to be disturbed until you'd had a chance to see it." "What's in it?" "I don't know. I handled his legal affairs, not his personal life, but he was very insistent that you see the house before making any decisions." That Saturday, Emily drove to the address Harrison had given her. She expected something modest, given Walter's frugal nature. What she found was a small but well-maintained craftsman-style house in a quiet neighborhood outside the city. The yard was neat, the paint fresh. It looked like a place where someone had cared about details. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was stale from weeks of being closed up, but the house was clean. The furniture was old but quality, the kind that lasted generations. Emily walked through the living room, the kitchen, a small dining area. Everything was organized, almost sterile. This was the home of a man who lived alone and liked it that way. Then she found the locked room. It was at the end of a short hallway, distinguished from the other doors by a deadbolt.
Emily tried the key Harrison had given her. It fit. She turned it, opened the door, and froze. The room was an art studio. Canvases covered every wall, propped on easels, stacked in corners. Paintings. Dozens, maybe hundreds of them. And as Emily stepped closer, her breath caught in her throat. They were all of her. Not portraits exactly. More like moments. Emily greeting someone at the reception desk, her smile captured in soft watercolors. Emily walking down the street with her coffee, rendered in confident oils. Emily sitting in the park where she sometimes ate lunch, a sketch in charcoal. Emily through a window, Emily in morning light, Emily in profile, Emily laughing at something unseen. 3 years of watching, 3 years of painting, 3 years of obsession. Emily's hands went cold. This wasn't gratitude. This was something else entirely. She backed toward the door, her heart hammering. Harrison said Walter was private, quiet, harmless. But this room told a different story. This room screamed stalker, obsession, danger. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and called Harrison. He answered on the second ring. "Emily, is everything all right?" "I'm at the house. There's a room. It's full of paintings. Of me." Silence on the other end. Then, "What?" "Hundreds of paintings, Harrison. All of me. From different places, different times. He was following me, watching me. This isn't gratitude. This is..." "Stay there. I'm coming over. Don't touch anything." Harrison arrived 20 minutes later, which felt like an eternity. Emily waited outside, unable to stay in the house. When Harrison's car pulled up, she saw he wasn't alone. A woman in her 40s stepped off the passenger side, professional and composed. "This is Jennifer Rhodes," Harrison said. "She's a private investigator. I've used her services before." Jennifer shook Emily's hand. Mr. Beck explained the situation. "May I see the room?" They went inside together. Jennifer walked through the studio slowly, examining paintings, taking photos. Her expression gave nothing away. Emily and Harrison waited in the living room, neither speaking. When Jennifer emerged 15 minutes later, she was holding a painting. "There's something you need to see." She set the painting on the coffee table. It was different from the others, a self-portrait of Walter. He was depicted sitting in the studio, surrounded by his paintings, but he wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the viewer, at whoever would eventually see this. And in his painted hand was a letter.
"There's a safe in the studio," Jennifer said, "behind that painting. It's not locked." They returned to the room. Jennifer removed the self-portrait from the wall, revealing a small wall safe with its door hanging open. Inside was a single envelope marked, "If Emily is reading this." Harrison handed it to Emily. Her hands were steadier now, but her mind was reeling. She opened the envelope and began to read. "Emily, if you're reading this, then you found my studio, and you're probably terrified. I don't blame you. I would be too. I need to tell you the truth, and I need you to believe that everything I'm about to say is real, even though it sounds impossible. I am not Walter Hastings." Emily stopped reading and looked up at Harrison and Jennifer. They were watching her carefully. "Keep going," Harrison said quietly. "My real name is Marcus Reed. I stole Walter Hastings' identity 23 years ago. The real Walter Hastings died in a car accident in 2002, but I made it look like I died instead. I took his name, his social security number, his entire life. Why? Because I was running from something terrible. Something I did when I was young and stupid and angry. Something that would have put me in prison for the rest of my life if anyone discovered it. For 23 years, I've lived as Walter Hastings. I wore his life like a coat, never quite fitting, always afraid someone would notice. The real Walter's wife died before I took his identity, so there was no one to recognize the replacement. I was careful. I was smart. I got away with it. But 3 years ago, I walked into that law office ready to die, and you smiled at me and something broke inside me.
Or maybe something finally healed. I realized I had spent 2 decades running from one terrible thing I did, and in the process I had become something worse. A ghost. A lie. A theft of someone else's existence. Your kindness made me want to be real again. To be human again. So I started painting you. Not because I was obsessed with you romantically, I need you to understand that, but because you represented something I'd lost. Authenticity. Humanity. I painted you because you were the realest thing in my fake life. The money I'm leaving you isn't Walter Hastings's money. It's mine. I earned it. I invested it. And it's clean. I'm leaving it to you because I want something good to come from the lie I've lived. But there's a problem, Emily. A big one. If you accept the inheritance as Walter Hastings' heir, you'll eventually discover the identity theft. Records will be checked, backgrounds investigated, and the truth will come out. You could be implicated in fraud. You could lose everything and possibly face legal consequences for receiving stolen property, even though you had no knowledge of the crime. I've left you 3 options, all documented in separate files in this safe. Option 1, walk away. Refuse the inheritance. Tell Mr. Beck you don't want it. You'll go back to your life as it was and no one will ever know about any of this. Option 2, take the money and keep quiet about what you've learned. The documentation's good enough that no one will likely investigate. You'll be rich, but you'll be living a lie just like I did. You'll know the money came from a crime. Option 3, the truth. In the safe, there's a full confession. Every detail of what I did in 1982 that made me run, every detail of how I stole Walter Hastings' identity, every detail of the life I've lived since. Take this confession to the police. Let the truth come out. The inheritance will be seized, investigated, and eventually dissolved. You'll get nothing, but you'll sleep at night knowing you did the right thing. I can't tell you which option to choose. That's not my place. I've made enough choices for other people. But I want you to know this. Whatever you decide, you've already given me the most valuable thing anyone has given me in 40 years. You gave me a reason to be human again, even if only for 3 years. You can't put a price on that. Thank you, Emily, for everything. Marcus Reed, 1956-2025, who briefly pretended to be Walter Hastings. The letter slipped from Emily's fingers and drifted to the floor. She looked at Harrison, then at Jennifer, and at the hundreds of paintings surrounding them. "Is this real?" she whispered. Harrison picked up the letter and read it, his face growing paler with each line. When he finished, he carefully set it down and removed his glasses to rub his eyes. "If this is real," he said slowly, "then I've been helping a criminal hide for 20 years. I could be disbarred." Jennifer was already at the safe, removing files. She spread them across a nearby table and began examining them. After several moments of tense silence, she looked up. "It's all here. Documentation of the original Marcus Reed, photos showing the same man as Walter Hastings, a detailed confession about a crime committed in 1982. Looks like he was involved in a robbery that resulted in someone's death. Details about how he faked his death and assumed Hastings's identity." She looked at Emily. "This is real, or it's the most elaborate hoax I've ever seen." Emily sank onto a nearby stool, staring at the paintings. Hundreds of images of herself, created by a man who was living a lie, who saw in her something true enough to make him want to be real again. "What do I do?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I think you need to decide what kind of person you want to be. The kind who takes the easy way, or the kind who does what's right regardless of the cost." Emily looked at him sharply.
easy for you to say. You're not the one losing $2.3 million. No, Harrison agreed. But I am the one who has to decide whether to report this to the Bar Association, knowing it could end my career. We all have to make hard choices, Emily. The question is what we can live with. Jennifer closed the files. For what it's worth, if you go to the police with this, there's a good chance Marcus Reed's confession will protect you from any legal consequences. You had no knowledge of the fraud. You're a victim of his scheme as much as anyone. But the money's gone either way. Yes, the money's gone. Emily stood and walked back into the studio. She moved between the paintings, studying each one. They weren't creepy, she realized. They weren't the work of a stalker or an obsessive. They were the work of someone trying to remember what it felt like to be human. Someone practicing humanity by painting it over and over, hoping that eventually it would stick. She thought about Marcus, spending 3 years in this room, trying to capture something true while living a lie. She thought about the real Walter Hastings, dead for 23 years, his identity stolen and worn by someone else. And she thought about herself, standing in a reception area on a Tuesday morning 3 years ago, asking an old man if he wanted coffee. Such a small thing. Such enormous consequences. Emily turned to face Harrison and Jennifer. I need to think about this. Can you give me a week? Harrison nodded. Take the files with you. Read everything. Make an informed decision. They left the house together, Jennifer taking photos for her records, Harrison making notes about next steps. Emily locked the door behind them and stood in the yard for a long moment, looking at this house that belonged to her, but also didn't, built on a foundation of lies and paid for with the wages of crime. She got in her car and drove back to her cramped apartment, carrying a box full of secrets that could change everything, or nothing, depending on what she chose. The inheritance that seemed like a miracle was now a test, and Emily had no idea if she was strong enough to pass it. Emily had 1 week to decide. Keep the fortune built on a dead man's stolen identity, or sacrifice $2.3 million to tell the truth. But as she dug deeper into Marcus Reed's past, she discovered something that changed everything. Again, the confession wasn't complete. There was another victim, and they were still alive.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Emily called in sick to work on Monday. She'd never done that before. Not once in 5 years, but she needed time to think. She sat in her apartment, surrounded by Marcus Reed's files, reading and rereading the confession, looking for something. She wasn't sure what. The crime itself was straightforward enough. In 1982, Marcus Reed, then 26 years old, had been involved in a robbery. He and 2 others had broken into a warehouse, looking for electronics they could fence. A security guard had surprised them. One of Marcus's accomplices had panicked and attacked the guard. The guard had died. Marcus and his accomplices had fled. Marcus's confession claimed he hadn't been the one who killed the guard, but he'd been there, and that made him equally guilty under the law. He'd been young, stupid, broke, and desperate, none of which excused what happened. In the days after, before the police could identify the robbers, Marcus had faked his death in a car accident and stolen Walter Hastings' identity. 43 years of running. 43 years of being someone else. Emily found herself feeling sympathy for him, despite everything. Then she'd remember the real Walter Hastings, whose death had been turned into a convenient escape route, and the sympathy would curdle into anger. Then she'd remember her own situation, being offered a fortune that she could only accept by perpetuating a crime, and the anger would twist into frustration. She was reading the confession for the 5th time when she noticed something odd, a reference that didn't quite fit. Marcus mentioned that the robbery had been planned by someone who knew the warehouse schedule,
But later in the confession, he said the three of them had chosen the warehouse randomly. It was a small inconsistency, probably nothing, but Emily had spent 5 years working in a law office, and she'd learned that small inconsistencies usually meant something. She pulled out her laptop and started researching. The crime itself wasn't hard to find. Warehouse robbery, security guard killed, unsolved. It had made the local news in Boston in 1982, then faded into obscurity. The guard's name was Robert Chang. He was 42 years old, married with 2 children. Emily found an obituary. Robert Chang survived by his wife Helen and 2 sons, Thomas and David. She stared at the names. These are real people whose lives had been destroyed by what Marcus Reed and his accomplices had done. They deserved justice, even if it was 43 years late. But something still bothered her about the confession. She went back to the files and found a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings about the robbery. Marcus had apparently kept every article published about the crime, like some kind of twisted scrapbook. She read through them carefully. Most were basic reporting. Warehouse broken into, guard killed, suspects unknown. It had made the local news in Boston in 1982, then faded into obscurity. The guard's name was Robert Chang. He was 42 years old, married with 2 children. Emily found an obituary. Robert Chang, survived by his wife Helen and 2 sons, Thomas and David. She stared at the names. These are real people whose lives had been destroyed by what Marcus Reed and his accomplices had done. They deserved justice, even if it was 43 years late. But something still bothered her about the confession. She went back to the files and found a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings about the robbery. Marcus had apparently kept every article published about the crime, like some kind of twisted scrapbook. She read through them carefully. Most were basic reporting. Warehouse broken into, guard killed, suspects unknown. But one article from a few weeks after the robbery caught her attention. It mentioned that police were investigating whether the robbery might have been an inside job since the thieves had disabled the alarm system with what appeared to be specific knowledge of its setup. Marcus's confession made no mention of this. In fact, he specifically said they'd triggered the alarm and had to run when the guard showed up. Emily sat back, her mind racing. Either the news article was wrong, or Marcus's confession was incomplete, or, and this made her stomach turn, he was still lying, even in his supposedly truthful confession. She needed more information. She pulled up her phone and called Jennifer Rhodes, the private investigator. "I need you to look into something for me," Emily said when Jennifer answered. "The 1982 warehouse robbery. I want to know if the police ever identified any suspects." "I can do that," she said. "May I ask why?" "Something in the confession doesn't add up. I think Marcus left something out." "Interesting. Give me a few days." Emily spent the rest of the week in a haze of research and worry. She went to work but couldn't focus. She kept seeing Robert Chang's obituary photo in her mind, a smiling man with kind eyes, someone's husband and father, dead because 3 young men wanted electronics they could sell. On Thursday, Jennifer called. "Can you meet me? I found something." They met at a coffee shop. Jennifer had a folder with her, and her expression was troubled. She said without preamble, "The police did have suspects, 3 men. They had descriptions from a witness who saw them leaving the area, but they couldn't identify 2 of them. No fingerprints, no clear photos. The 3rd man, though." She slid a photo across the table. It was a police sketch from 1982 showing a young man with sharp features and dark hair. She continued, "They identified him from the sketch. His name was Thomas Morty. 24 years old, already had a record for theft. Police put out a warrant for his arrest, but he disappeared. They assumed he'd fled the state or the country." "And did he?" "That's the thing. I did some digging. Thomas Morty died in a car accident 3 weeks after the robbery. It was ruled accidental, single-car collision, driver lost control and went off a bridge. The body was badly burned, but it was identified through dental records." Emily felt cold. Marcus Reed died in a car accident 3 weeks after the robbery. That's when he supposedly faked his death. Jennifer nodded grimly. "I think Marcus Reed and Thomas Morty were the same person." The pieces clicked into place in Emily's mind.
Marcus Reed didn't steal Walter Hastings' identity. He stole Thomas Morty's identity first, then staged Thomas Morty's death, then became Walter Hastings. It's more complicated than that. I checked the dates carefully. Thomas Morty died 3 weeks after the robbery. Walter Hastings died 5 weeks after the robbery. So there was a gap. Marcus was someone else entirely during those 2 weeks. Or he was no one, living off the grid, planning his next move. Emily rubbed her temples. This was getting more complicated by the minute. Why would he confess to being Marcus Reed if he was really Thomas Morty? Maybe Marcus Reed was another alias. Or maybe, she hesitated, maybe the confession is designed to lead you to the wrong conclusion. Why would he do that? I don't know. But there's something else. She pulled out another document. I found Robert Chang's family. His widow Helen is still alive. She's 84 years old, living in a nursing home. Her 2 sons are both still in Boston. Thomas Chang is a high school teacher. David Chang is a lawyer. Emily's eyes widened. David Chang. Do you know where he practices? That's the really strange part. She looked Emily in the eye. He works at Morrison & Associates. He's been there for 15 years. The coffee shop tilted around Emily. That's impossible. That can't be a coincidence. I don't think it is.
Emily's mind was racing. David Chang, son of the murdered security guard, worked at the same law firm where Emily had worked for 5 years. The same law firm where Marcus, or whoever he was, had come to arrange his affairs. The same law firm where Emily had smiled at an old man and unknowingly saved his life. Does he know? Emily asked. David Chang, does he know about Marcus Reed or Walter Hastings or whatever his real name is? I don't know, but I think we need to find out. Emily pulled out her phone and called Harrison back. I need you to tell me about David Chang. Harrison sounded surprised. David? He's one of our junior partners. Excellent attorney. Specializes in estate law. Why? His father was Robert Chang, the security guard killed in the 1982 warehouse robbery. Silence on the other end of the line. Then quietly, oh my God. Did you know? No, I knew David's father had been killed when David was young, but I never made the connection. Emily, what does this mean? It means I need to talk to David Chang today. Can you arrange that? I'll call him now. 30 minutes later, Emily walked into Morrison & Associates for what felt like the first time, even though she'd worked there for 5 years. Everything looked different now. Every familiar corner held new questions. David Chang was waiting in Harrison's office. He was a man in his late 40s, wearing an expensive suit, his expression carefully neutral. Emily had seen him around the office countless times, but had never really talked to him beyond basic pleasantries. Miss Carter, he said. Harrison said you needed to speak with me urgently. Emily sat down, very aware that both Harrison and Jennifer were watching this interaction carefully. I need to ask you about your father, about Robert Chang. David's expression didn't change. My father died when I was 11 years old. He was murdered during a robbery. I don't see what that has to do with you. I think one of the men who killed your father left me $2.3 million. Now David's expression changed. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Explain? Emily explained. She told him about Walter Hastings, about the inheritance, about the studio full of paintings, about the confession. She watched David's face carefully as she spoke. He gave away almost nothing, but she could see the tension building in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the arms of his chair. When she finished, David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Show me the confession." Harrison hesitated. "David, I'm not sure that's—" "Show me the confession, Harrison." Harrison looked at Emily. She nodded. Harrison retrieved the file from his desk and handed it to David, who read through it slowly, his face growing paler with each page. When he finished, he set the papers down carefully. This man, Marcus Reed or Thomas Moretti or whoever he is, he claims he wasn't the one who killed my father. That's what he says, Emily confirmed. Do you believe him? I don't know. The confession seems honest in some ways, but it's missing things, important things. Like what? Like how they knew how to disable the alarm system,
Like why he chose Walter Hastings specifically, like what happened during those weeks between identities. David stood and walked to the window, his back to them. I was 11 years old when my father died. I spent the next 37 years wondering who killed him, wondering if the police would ever catch them, wondering what I would do if I ever came face to face with one of them. He turned around. 3 years ago, an old man came to this office to update his will. Harrison handled his case, but I saw him in the reception area. He was talking to you, Emily, laughing about something. You handed him coffee. Emily's breath caught. You were there? I noticed him because he reminded me of my father. Same age my father would have been if he lived. Same gentle way of moving. I watched you talk to him, watched him smile at you. I remember thinking that whoever he was lucky to have someone be kind to him. David's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. 3 years ago, I was going through some old case files. I was researching precedent for a different case, and I found a document with Walter Hastings' signature from 20 years ago. Something about it bothered me. I couldn't say what. He walked back to his chair and sat down. I'm not supposed to tell anyone this. I could be disbarred for what I'm about to say, but I pulled Walter Hastings' complete file, all his documents over 20 years, and I compared the signatures. Harrison leaned forward. David, what did you find? The signatures changed. Around 2002, Walter Hastings' signature became completely different. Same name, different handwriting entirely. I knew then that something was wrong, that whoever came to this office in 2002 wasn't the same Walter Hastings who had been a client in the 90s. Emily felt the room spinning. You knew. All this time you knew. I suspected. I didn't have proof, and I didn't know if it mattered. Maybe the original Walter Hastings had a stroke that changed his handwriting. Maybe he had someone else sign for him. There could have been innocent explanations. But you didn't think so, Jennifer said. No, I didn't think so. So I started watching him. Whenever he came to the office, I made sure I was around. I studied him. I looked for any sign that he might be connected to my father's death. Did you find anything? Emily asked. No, nothing concrete. But there were little things. The way he startled when police sirens went by. The way he avoided talking about his past. The way he seemed guilty. Like he was carrying something heavy. Harrison removed his glasses and cleaned them, a nervous habit. David, why didn't you come to me with this? Because I wasn't sure. And because, David's voice dropped, because I wanted to know the truth before I made it official. If this man had killed my father, I needed to understand why. I needed to look him in the eye and see if there was any remorse. Did you ever confront him? Emily asked. No. I waited too long. 3 years of watching, of investigating quietly, of trying to build a case. Then he died. And then you came to Harrison's office with your story, and I realized the truth was about to come out anyway. Emily stood up and walked to where David sat. You've known about me this whole time? You knew he left me money? Not until today. I knew he'd updated his will, but I didn't know the contents. Client confidentiality. David looked up at her. I need to ask you something, Emily. What are you going to do with the confession? I don't know. That's why I'm here. I wanted to talk to you first. The victim's family deserves.
The victim's family deserves the truth, David interrupted, not a convenient lie wrapped in a confession. Emily frowned. What do you mean? David picked up the confession and held it up. This confession is too clean, too simple. Marcus Reed claims he was just an accomplice, that someone else killed my father, that he ran away and assumed a false identity out of fear. It's the confession of someone who wants to seem guilty enough to be believable, but not guilty enough to be truly culpable. You think he's still lying, Jennifer said. I think he's protecting someone, or protecting something. Harrison stood up. This is getting complicated. If there's more to the story than what's in the confession, we need to find out what it is before Emily makes any decisions.
I agree, David said. Which is why I'm going to tell you what I've spent 3 years discovering and why I think this whole situation is much worse than any of us realized. He pulled out his phone and brought up a series of photos. I hired an investigator of my own, someone discreet, someone who could dig into Walter Hastings' past without raising alarms. He glanced at Jennifer. No offense to your profession, but I needed someone who wasn't afraid to operate in gray areas. None taken, Jennifer said dryly. David swiped through the photos. Walter Hastings, the real one, died in 2002. Car accident, as we know. But here's what the confession doesn't tell you. Walter Hastings and Thomas Moretti knew each other. Emily stared at the screen. David had pulled up an old photograph, yellowed with age. It showed 2 young men standing together, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling at the camera. One was clearly a younger version of the man Emily had known as Walter Hastings. The other matched the police sketch of Thomas Moretti. They were friends? Emily asked. More than that. They were roommates in college in the late 70s. Walter Hastings majored in electrical engineering. Thomas Moretti dropped out after 2 years. David swiped to another photo. This is them in 1981, a year before the robbery. The second photo showed the same 2 men, older now, standing in front of a building. Emily recognized the building from Marcus's files. It was the warehouse that had been robbed, Emily whispered. Walter Hastings worked there. He was an engineer for the company that owned the warehouse. He designed their security system. David's voice was hard. Thomas Moretti didn't randomly choose that warehouse. Walter Hastings gave him the access codes. Walter Hastings planned the whole thing. The room went silent. Emily sat down heavily, her mind reeling. The confession says Marcus Reed was following someone else's plan, Jennifer said slowly, someone who knew the warehouse schedule. Because Walter Hastings was the plan. He set up the robbery, and when it went wrong, when my father was killed, he didn't run. He stayed. He kept his life, kept his job, kept his identity. It was Thomas Moretti who had to disappear. So Thomas Moretti became Marcus Reed, created a false identity to hide from the police. For a few weeks, then Walter Hastings conveniently died in a car accident, and Marcus Reed became the new Walter Hastings, taking over his friend's identity, his life, everything. Harrison looked sick. You're saying the real Walter Hastings faked his own death so his friend could assume his identity? So Thomas Moretti could hide in plain sight? I'm saying it's the only explanation that makes sense. The real Walter Hastings felt guilty about what happened. My father's death was his fault. He planned the robbery. So he gave Thomas Moretti a gift, a clean identity, a fresh start, a way to disappear forever. But where did the real Walter Hastings go? Emily asked. David shook his head. I don't know. My investigator tried to track him down, but the trail goes cold after 2002. He could be dead, he could be living under another identity, or he paused, or Marcus Reed killed him. The words hung in the air like poison. That's a serious accusation, Harrison said quietly. It's a logical conclusion. Think about it. If you're Thomas Moretti, running from a murder charge, and your friend offers to help you disappear by giving you his identity, what's the safest way to ensure he never talks, that he never changes his mind, that he never turns you in? You kill him, Jennifer finished. Emily felt sick. So the man I talked to, the man who left me everything, could have killed 2 people. My father and his friend? It's possible. I can't prove it, but it's possible. Emily stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Boston skyline. Everything she thought she knew had been turned upside down. The kind old man who'd been saved by her smile might have been a double murderer. The inheritance that seemed like a miracle might be blood money twice over. There's one more thing, David said quietly. My investigator found something else. About a year ago, someone started making inquiries about the 1982 robbery.
discreet inquiries, asking questions about the investigation, about whether there were any suspects, about whether the case was still open. Who? Harrison asked. We don't know. But the inquiries came from an account at Morrison & Associates. Someone in this office was researching my father's murder. Everyone turned to look at Harrison. He raised his hands. It wasn't me. I had no idea about any of this until today. It was me, Emily heard herself say. What? David's voice was sharp. Not a year ago, 3 years ago, right after Walter, or whoever he was, came in to update his will. He mentioned something to me about a security guard, about how he had made mistakes when he was young. I didn't think much of it at the time, but later I was curious. So I used the office computer to look up old crimes involving security guards in Boston. Emily turned to face them. I found the article about your father. I read about the robbery, and then I forgot about it. It was just idle curiosity. I had no idea it connected to Walter Hastings. David's expression was unreadable. You searched for it from your work computer? Yes. Why? Because that means Walter Hastings knew you were looking into it. Our IT system logs all searches. As a client, he would have had access to his case file. He would have seen that someone at the firm was researching that specific crime. The implications hit Emily like a physical blow. He knew. When he left me the inheritance, he knew I'd looked into the robbery. Which means, Jennifer said slowly, he wanted you to find out. The confession, the paintings, all of it, it was designed to make you investigate. He wanted someone to uncover the truth. But why? Emily asked. Why go through all of this? Why not just confess before he died?
David stood and walked to the center of the room, because he needed someone who would care enough to dig deeper, someone who would question the obvious answer, someone who would find out about Walter Hastings' involvement. He's pointing me toward the real Walter Hastings, Emily whispered. Or toward proof that he killed him, David countered. Harrison rubbed his face tiredly. This is insane. We're talking about multiple identities, possible multiple murders, and an inheritance that might be designed as some kind of treasure hunt for the truth. So what do I do? Emily asked, looking at each of them in turn. I can't accept the money, not now, knowing all of this. But if I go to the police with what we have, we don't have enough proof for them to do anything. The case is 43 years old. The main suspect is dead, and we're just speculating about the rest. You do what he wanted you to do, David said. You find Walter Hastings, the real one. And how am I supposed to do that? Your investigator couldn't find him. My investigator didn't have what you have. David pointed to the file on Harrison's desk. The complete confession, the house, the studio, everything Thomas Moretti or Marcus Reed or whoever he was left behind. He left you clues, Emily. You just have to find them. Emily looked at the file, then at the people around her. A lawyer who'd unknowingly aided a criminal for 20 years, a private investigator who was realizing this case was far bigger than she'd thought, and the son of a murdered man who'd spent 3 years watching his father's killer and never knowing it. If I do this, Emily said slowly, if I try to find the real Walter Hastings, I need to know what happens when I find him. What happens to the truth? David met her eyes. Then we give my father justice. Finally. Emily nodded. Okay, then I'll do it. But I'm gonna need help. You have it, Harrison said. All of us, Jennifer agreed. David extended his hand. Find Walter Hastings, the real one. Find out what really happened, and then we'll decide together what to do with the truth. Emily shook his hand, feeling the weight of his grip, the weight of his loss, the weight of 43 years of questions. She'd come to this office that morning expecting a simple answer about what to do with an inheritance. Instead, she'd found a mystery that reached back decades and touched more lives than she could count. The receptionist who'd smiled at a stranger was about to become a detective. She just hoped she'd like what she found.
Emily took a week off from work. Harrison approved it immediately. Given the circumstances, he could hardly refuse. She spent the first day back at Walter's house, this time not as a frightened heir, but as an investigator. Jennifer came with her, along with David, who had taken personal time from the firm. They started in the studio. David stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at the hundreds of paintings of Emily. He was obsessed, he said quietly. Not with me, Emily replied, studying a watercolor of herself reading a book in the park. With the idea of me, with what I represented. Redemption, maybe? Or normalcy? A life he could never have. Jennifer was examining the paintings more closely, using a magnifying glass. Some of these are dated. Look, this one is from March 2023, this one from July 2024. He painted you chronologically, documenting 3 years of observation. That should be disturbing, Emily said, but somehow it's just sad. David moved deeper into the room, his eyes scanning every surface. If he left clues about the real Walter Hastings, they'd be here. This was his private space, the place where he could be honest. They spent hours searching. The paintings revealed nothing but their own creation, layers of paint, careful brushstrokes, the work of someone teaching himself art late in life. But then, Emily found something odd. One painting, tucked in the back corner, was different from the others. It was a landscape. Rolling hills, a small house in the distance, mountains on the horizon. The style was similar to the paintings of Emily, but the subject was completely different. And in the bottom right corner, barely visible, was a signature. W.H. 1999. This isn't one of his, Emily said, holding it up. This is from before he became Walter Hastings. Jennifer photographed the painting from multiple angles. If this was painted by the real Walter Hastings in 1999, then it might show us where he lived or where he liked to paint. Can you identify the location from the landscape? Asked David. Maybe. The mountains look like they could be New Hampshire or Vermont. I'll run the image through some databases, see if we can narrow it down. They continued searching and found 2 more landscape paintings, both signed W.H. and dated from the late 90s. Each showed a similar area, hills, mountains, rural settings. The real Walter Hastings had painted these before he disappeared, before Thomas Moretti took his place. In a drawer beneath the easels, David found a box of old receipts. Most were mundane, art supplies, groceries, utility bills. But one receipt stood out, a purchase from a hardware store in Greenfield, New Hampshire, dated March 2002. The same month, Walter Hastings had supposedly died. Why would he buy hardware supplies in New Hampshire if he was about to fake his death in Boston? Emily asked. Maybe he wasn't buying them for himself. Maybe he was buying them for someone else, someone who was setting up a new life in New Hampshire. David took photos of the receipt. We need to go to Greenfield. That's a 3-hour drive, Harrison said. He'd been quiet, standing in the doorway, watching them work. But Emily suspected he was struggling with his own guilt about not seeing the truth earlier. Greenfield was a small town in southern New Hampshire, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and newcomers were noticed. They started at the hardware store from the receipt, which was still in business, run by the same family that had owned it in 2002. The owner, a man in his 60s named Frank Miller, looked at the receipt and shrugged. 23 years ago? I can barely remember yesterday. You'd have to check our old records, and I'm not even sure we kept them that long. Is there anyone who might remember a customer from that time? Someone who made unusual purchases? Maybe someone buying supplies to renovate a house? Frank thought for a moment. Well, there was that fella who bought out half our inventory of insulation and drywall. This would have been around 2002, yeah? I remember because it was odd. He paid cash for everything and hauled it all away in a rental truck. Can you describe him? David leaned forward. Older guy, probably in his 50s back then? Quiet, polite, had an engineer's way of talking, if you know what I mean. Real precise about measurements and specifications.
Emily pulled out a photo on her phone, a picture of Walter Hastings from his file. Is this him? Frank studied the photo and nodded slowly. Yeah, that could be him. Hard to say for sure after all these years, but the face looks right. Did he say what he was building? Jennifer asked. No, kept to himself. But I remember he asked about properties for sale in the area, remote properties. I directed him to the local real estate office. The real estate office was 2 blocks away, a small storefront that had clearly seen better days. The agent, a woman named Margaret Chen, had been working there for 30 years and had an impressive memory for transactions. 2002, she mused, pulling out old ledgers. Everything in this office was still paper-based. Let me see. She ran her finger down pages of faded entries. Here, March 2002, property on Old Mill Road, about 15 miles outside town. 40 acres, mostly wooded with a small cabin. Sold to... She squinted at the handwriting. Walter Hastings. Emily's heart raced. Do you remember him? I remember the sale because it was unusual. He paid cash, $85,000 for the whole property. Said he wanted privacy, wanted to get away from the city. Nice man, very polite. Looked up. Is he in some kind of trouble? He passed away, Emily said, which was technically true. We're trying to settle his estate. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Margaret wrote down the property address and handed it to Emily. The cabin's still there, as far as I know. Not much out that way, though. Just woods and quiet. They drove out to Old Mill Road as the afternoon sun began to sink toward the mountains. The road turned from asphalt to gravel to dirt. Houses became sparse, then disappeared entirely. After 15 miles, they found a narrow driveway marked only by a dented mailbox. The driveway wound through thick woods for nearly half a mile before opening into a clearing. There sat a cabin. Small, weathered, but well-maintained. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was home. Emily looked at David and Jennifer. Do we knock? We came all this way, David said. His voice was tight. We knock.
They approached the cabin together. Emily noticed details. A vegetable garden, neatly tended, firewood stacked precisely under a covered shelter, a satellite dish on the roof. Someone lived here, and they lived here carefully. Emily raised her hand and knocked. For a long moment, nothing. Then footsteps inside. The door opened. The man who answered was in his 70s, with white hair and gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore flannel and jeans, and he looked at them with confusion that slowly transformed into resignation. I knew someone would come eventually, he said quietly. I just thought I'd have more time. Walter Hastings? Emily asked. The man smiled sadly. I haven't used that name in 23 years, but yes, that's who I used to be. Walter Hastings, the real one, stood before them, alive and hidden for over 2 decades. But his first words weren't an apology or an explanation. They were a warning. You need to leave right now. He knows you're looking for me, and if he finds you here, you'll all be in danger. The confession hadn't been a gift. It had been a trap. Chapter 5. The Weight of Truth. Walter Hastings, the real one, didn't invite them inside immediately. He stood in the doorway, his eyes moving between Emily, David, and Jennifer, assessing them like an engineer calculating variables. How did you find me? He finally asked. Your paintings and a hardware store receipt. You weren't as hidden as you thought. Walter's laugh was bitter. I suppose I wasn't. Thomas always said I was too sentimental. Keeping those old paintings was stupid. He stepped aside. You'd better come in. If you found me, someone else might too. The cabin's interior was sparse but comfortable. Books lined handmade shelves. A wood stove radiated warmth. Everything was neat, organized.
the home of someone who lived deliberately. Walter gestured for them to sit at a small table. "Before you ask your questions," Walter said, "I need to know, is Thomas dead?" "If you mean the man who took your identity," David said, his voice hard, "yes. He died 3 weeks ago." Walter closed his eyes and was quiet for a long moment. When he opened them, they were wet. "I thought I'd feel relief, but I just feel empty." "He left a confession about the robbery in 1982, about your father." She looked at David. "He claimed he didn't kill the security guard." "He didn't," Walter said softly. "I did." The words fell like stones. David stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "What?" "I killed Robert Chang, not Thomas. Me." Walter's voice was steady, but his hands shook. "It was my fault. All of it." Emily felt frozen. The man sitting across from her, this gentle elderly man who lived alone in the woods, was confessing to murder. "Explain," David demanded. "Now." Walter took a deep breath. "Thomas Moretti was my best friend. We met in college. He was brilliant but poor, working 3 jobs to afford tuition. When he dropped out, I felt guilty. He had everything: education, a good job, prospects. He had nothing." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening woods. "In 1982, I was working as an engineer for a company that operated several warehouses. Thomas was living in my apartment, unemployed, desperate. He kept talking about how unfair it was, how people like me had everything while people like him got nothing. And stupidly, drunkenly, I agreed with him." "You planned the robbery," Jennifer said. "I suggested it. I told Thomas about the warehouse, about the security system I had designed, about how easy it would be to bypass it. I thought we'd just steal some equipment, sell it, make some money." Thomas convinced 2 other guys to help. I stayed home. I couldn't risk being identified, but I gave them everything they needed to pull it off. Walter's reflection in the window looked haunted. They weren't supposed to hurt anyone. The guard wasn't supposed to be there, but something went wrong. When Thomas came back, he was covered in blood. He told me one of the other guys had panicked when the guard surprised them. There'd been a fight. The guard had pulled an alarm. Thomas had tried to stop it, and then, David's voice was dangerous. Thomas said one of the other guys hit the guard with a crowbar. The guard fell, hit his head. They ran. Walter turned to face them. "But Thomas was lying. I found out later, years later, that Thomas was the one who'd hit the guard. He lied to me because he knew I'd turn him in if I knew the truth." David moved toward Walter and Jennifer stepped in between them. "Let him finish," she said quietly. Walter continued, his voice hollow. "The police started investigating. They had descriptions. They identified Thomas. It was only a matter of time before they connected him to me. Thomas panicked. He said we had to run, had to disappear. But I couldn't run. I had a career, a life." "So you helped him instead," Emily said. "I did worse than that. A few days after the robbery, I realized the police would eventually check Thomas's known associates. They'd question me. I'd crack under pressure. I wasn't built for criminal life. So I came up with a plan. I went to the warehouse one night. I broke in. I made it look like I'd been there during the robbery, and then I called the police anonymously and told them I'd seen Walter Hastings fleeing the scene." "You understand." Emily understood. "You framed yourself. I made myself a suspect, and then I faked my death. Car accident, body burned beyond recognition. I had access to dental records through my job. I falsified them. Walter Hastings died, and Marcus Reed was born." "Marcus Reed," Jennifer repeated. "That was you. That was me. Marcus Reed was an identity I created from scratch. Fake social security number, fake background. I lived as Marcus Reed for 3 weeks while Thomas went into hiding, and then I gave Thomas everything. My identity, my life, my credentials. He became Walter Hastings. I became no one. Why? Emily asked. Why give up everything? Because I killed Robert Chang. Walter's voice rose for the first time. Not directly, maybe not with my own hands, but I planned the robbery that got him killed. I gave Thomas the tools to do it. And when the police started closing in, it was the one who had the resources to disappear. Thomas couldn't. He had nothing. So I gave him what he needed and took the punishment I deserved. Hiding in the woods for 23 years is punishment? David's voice dripped with contempt. You think this has been easy? Walter gestured around the cabin. I've spent 2 decades with no friends, no family, no life. I was 30 years old when I came here. I've lived in this cabin alone, cut off from the world, knowing that every day I'm free is a day your father doesn't get. You think that's not punishment? My father is dead, David said coldly. You're alive. That's not justice.
You're right. It's not. Walter moved back to the table and sat down heavily. That's why I contacted Thomas 3 years ago. I told him it was time to end this, time to confess, time to face what we'd done. Emily leaned forward. But he didn't confess, not really. He wrote a confession that pointed investigators toward me while making himself look like a minor accomplice. Classic Thomas, always protecting himself first. Walter's expression was bitter. He came to visit me here, once, about 6 months before he died. He told me about you, Emily. Me? He said he'd met someone who reminded him of what it felt like to be human, someone whose kindness had made him want to be better. He was obsessed with you, not romantically, but as an idea, a symbol of redemption he could never reach. Walter looked at her intently. He wanted to leave you his money. I told him he couldn't, that it would expose everything. But Thomas was dying, and he didn't care anymore about keeping secrets. So the inheritance was his way of forcing the truth out, Jennifer said. Partially, but it was also a test. Walter pulled an envelope from his pocket. He asked me to give you this if you ever found me. He seemed to think you would. Emily took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter in the same shaky handwriting as the first confession. Emily, if you're reading this, you've found Walter, the real one, and now you know the truth. He's the good man trying to be bad, and I'm the bad man who tried to be good. Neither of us succeeded. I left you the money because I wanted you to have a choice. You could take it and ask no questions, most people would, or you could dig deeper, follow the clues, find the truth. I designed everything to lead you here, to this cabin, to this moment. Why? Because I'm dying, and I'm tired of carrying this lie. But I'm also a coward. I couldn't turn myself in. I couldn't face Robert Chang's family. I couldn't admit that I was the one who killed him. So I'm making you the judge. You, Emily Carter, who showed kindness to a stranger. You get to decide what happens next. In the cabin, Walter has kept evidence of everything. Documents, photos, a full confession, the real one, not the sanitized version I left in my studio. Everything you need to send both of us to prison, even though only Walter is alive to face it. You can destroy the evidence and keep the money. Walter will stay hidden, I'll stay dead, and Robert Chang's family will never know the truth. Or you can expose everything. Take the evidence to the police. Give David Chang the justice he deserves. Walter will go to prison, the money will be seized, and you'll walk away with nothing but the knowledge that you did the right thing. I can't tell you which choice to make, but I trust you to make it. Because unlike Walter and me, you're not broken. You're not running from who you are. Whatever you decide, thank you for that coffee 3 years ago. Thank you for treating an old man like a human being. In a life full of regrets, that morning isn't one of them. Thomas Moretti, who pretended to be Marcus Reed, who pretended to be Walter Hastings, who was never really anyone at all. Emily set the letter down,
Her hands were steady now, her mind clear. She looked at Walter Hastings, then at David Chang. "Where's the evidence?" she asked Walter. Walter stood and moved to a floorboard near the stove. He pried it up, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a metal box. He set it on the table. "Everything," he said simply. 23 years of documentation, proof of the identity theft, proof of my involvement in the robbery, proof that Thomas killed Robert Chang. Enough to close the case completely. David reached for the box, but Emily put her hand on it first. "Wait, before we open this, I need to understand something. Walter, you said Thomas killed the guard, but earlier you said you did. Which is it?" "I'm responsible. I planned the robbery. But who struck the blow?" "Thomas did, but—" "No buts," Emily interrupted. "David, your father was killed by Thomas Moretti. Walter Hastings planned a robbery, which is a crime, but he didn't kill anyone." "He's still responsible," David said. "Is he? He spent 23 years in exile. He's lost everything. He's been in prison, just not one with walls." Emily looked at each of them. "Thomas Moretti is dead. He can't face justice. Walter Hastings is alive, but he's already been punished. So what does justice look like here?" David was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we think carefully about what we do next. Because once we open that box and take it to the police, there's no going back. Walter goes to prison for accessory to murder and identity theft. The inheritance is seized, and your father's case is closed. But will that actually help anyone? It'll help me sleep at night." "Will it?" Emily asked gently. "Or will it just add more pain to pain?" David looked at Walter, who met his gaze steadily. "I'll turn myself in if that's what you want. I should have done it 23 years ago. I'm ready to face the consequences." "My father was 42 years old. I was 11. My brother was 9. Our mother never remarried, never moved on. She spent 30 years waiting for justice that never came. And now you're telling me that justice doesn't matter?" "I'm saying justice matters, but so does mercy. So does proportionality. So does understanding that sometimes the world is more complicated than guilty and innocent." Jennifer, who had been silent, spoke up. "Emily, what are you proposing exactly?" Emily stood and walked around the table thinking. "Thomas Moretti is dead. He was the killer. The case can be closed with the evidence in this box. We can prove Thomas was responsible without necessarily exposing all of Walter's involvement." "That's lying by omission," David said. "It's emphasizing the relevant truth. Your father's killer is identified. His family gets answers. The case is solved." "And Walter?" Emily looked at the older man. "Walter continues his exile, his punishment, his penance. But he does it knowing that the truth is out there, that Robert Chang's family knows who killed him." "And the money?" Jennifer asked. "I don't want it. I never did. It was always tainted, built on crimes and lies. Walter, what would you want done with it?" Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Robert Chang had 2 sons, David and Thomas. Thomas is a high school teacher, probably doesn't make much, and there are grandchildren now, I would imagine. The money should go to them, to Robert Chang's family. It won't bring him back, but at least some good can come from all this suffering." David's expression shifted, something cracking in his carefully maintained composure. "You want me to give the money to my family?" "It's not mine to give. It never was. Thomas stole my identity and built that fortune while living my life. But the foundation of it all was a crime that killed Robert Chang. The money should go to the people who lost the most."
Emily felt something settle in her chest, a rightness she hadn't felt since this whole situation began. "Then that's what we do. We take the evidence, we close the case, we identify Thomas Moretti as the killer. The estate goes to the Chang family as restitution. And Walter," she looked at him, "you stay here. You continue living with what you've done. You don't get forgiveness, and you don't get freedom. But you also don't add more damage to a situation that's already caused so much pain. That's not justice.
David said, but his voice was less certain now. Maybe not, Emily agreed. But it might be mercy. And sometimes mercy is what allows people to keep living. David sat down heavily. He put his head in his hands, and for a moment he looked like the 11-year-old boy who'd lost his father. When he looked up, his eyes were red. I've spent 37 years wanting revenge, wanting someone to pay. I've imagined what I'd do if I ever found the person responsible for my father's death. And now that I'm here, now that I have that person in front of me. He looked at Walter. I don't feel what I thought I'd feel. What do you feel? Tired. Just tired. David stood and walked to the window, the same window Walter had looked out of earlier. My father was a good man. He would have wanted justice, but he also would have wanted compassion. He was like that, always seeing the best in people, always believing in second chances. He turned back to them. If we do this, if we close the case with Thomas as the killer and leave Walter out of it, I need something from you. He looked at Walter. I need you to tell me about my father. What happened that night. Everything. No lies. No protection. Just the truth. Walter nodded slowly. I'll tell you everything. They sat at that table for 3 hours while Walter talked. He described the planning of the robbery, the mistakes they had made, the moment when everything went wrong. He told David about the panic afterward, about learning the guard's name from the news, about realizing they'd destroyed a family. He told him about the guilt that never left, the nightmares that still came. And he told David what the newspapers hadn't reported, that Robert Chang had tried to talk Thomas down, that in his final moments, Robert had tried to reason with the panicked young man, had tried to de-escalate, had tried to save everyone involved from making a terrible situation worse. Robert Chang died trying to be compassionate, and Thomas Moretti had killed him anyway. When Walter finished, David was crying openly. Emily found tissues in her purse and handed them to him. They sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the crackling of the fire in the stove. Finally, David spoke. My mother deserves to know the truth. Not all of it. She doesn't need to know about the complexity. But she deserves to know who killed my father and why. We can arrange that. I can present the evidence to the police in a way that focuses on Thomas Moretti. The case can be closed with him as the perpetrator. Mrs. Chang will get answers. And the money? David looked at Emily. Goes to your family. All of it. You can set up a trust. Divide it however you think is right. Your mother, your brother, your kids if you have them. It's not blood money anymore. It's restitution. David nodded slowly. Okay, we do it your way. Walter stood and retrieved the metal box. He opened it, revealing stacks of documents, photos, and a flash drive. Everything you need is here. The flash drive has a detailed video confession I recorded last year. I knew this day would come eventually. Jennifer took the box. I'll handle this carefully. The authorities will have no reason to look beyond Thomas Moretti if I present it correctly. They prepared to leave. At the door, David paused and turned back to Walter. I don't forgive you. I want you to know that. What you did, planning that robbery, even if you didn't kill my father, it set everything in motion. I can't forgive that. I don't expect you to. But I also don't want you to go to prison. My father wouldn't have wanted that. He believed in rehabilitation, in people learning from their mistakes. You've lived in a prison of your own making for 23 years. That's enough. Walter's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep living with it. Keep remembering. That's your sentence. They walked back to the car in darkness. The woods around them were silent except for the wind in the trees. Emily felt emotionally exhausted, wrung out by the day's revelations.
But she also felt something else. Peace. For the first time since this all began, she felt like we were doing the right thing. Are we making a mistake? Jennifer asked. Letting Walter stay hidden? Maybe, Emily admitted. But sometimes there are no good choices, only less bad ones. David was quiet in the back seat. And after an hour, he said, Emily, why did you push for mercy? You could have insisted we turn Walter in. You could have walked away with the money. Why didn't you? Emily thought about this. Because 3 years ago, I smiled at an old man and asked him if he wanted coffee. And that small moment of kindness spiraled into all of this. I've learned that small choices have big consequences. The choice we made today, to show mercy instead of demanding pure justice, that's going to have consequences too. I just hope they're good ones. And if they're not, then we'll deal with them together.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.